Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today reciters are Anusuya Mataji will be reciting in Sanskrit and Purta Prabhuji will be reciting in English from Canto 3, Chapter 27, verses 1 to 15. So Anusuya Mataji, whenever you're ready, can you please start with invocation 3 times? Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 1. Shri Bhagavanuvacha Prakritistopi Purusho Nachyate Prakritargunahe Avikarad Akartritvan Nirgunatvach Jalarkavat.
The personality of Godhead Kapila continued. When the living entity is thus unaffected by the modes of material nature, because he is unchanging and does not claim proprietorship, he remains apart from the reactions of the modes, although abiding in a material body, just as the sun remains aloof from its reflection on water.
Text 2. Sa esa yarhi prakritir guneshva abhivishyajate aham kriya vimurhatma kartasmitya bhimanyate.
When the soul is under the spell of material nature and false ego, identifying this body as the self, he becomes absorbed in material activities, and by the influence of false ego, he thinks that he is the proprietor of everything.
Text 3. Tena samsarapadavam avasobhyetya nirvritaha prasangikay karma doshahe sat asanmisra yonisu.
The conditioned soul, therefore, transmigrates into different species of life, higher and lower, because of his association with the modes of material nature. Unless he is relieved of material activities, he has to accept this position because of his faulty work.
Text 4. Arte hiya vidyamanepi shamsrutirna nivartate dhyayatodvishyan asya swapne narthagamo yatha.
Actually, a living entity is transcendental to material existence, but because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, his material existential condition does not cease, and just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of disadvantages.
Text 5. अत एव सनश्चित्तं प्रशक्तम् असतां पथि भक्तियोगेन तीव्रेण विरक्त्या च नयेद्वसम्.
It is the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus, his mind and consciousness will be under full control.
Text 6. यमाद्भिर्योगपथैर् अभ्यासन् श्रद्धयान्वितः मयि भावेन सत्येन मत्कथाश्रवणेन च.
One has to become faithful by practicing the controlling process of the yoga system and must elevate himself to the platform of unalloyed devotional service by chanting and hearing about me.
Text 7. सर्वभूता समत्स्वेन निर्वैरेण प्रसङ्गतः ब्रह्मचार्येण मौनेन स्वधर्मेण बलीयसा.
In executing devotional service, one has to see every living entity equally, without enmity towards anyone, yet without intimate connections with anyone. One has to observe celibacy, be grave, and execute his eternal activities, offering the results to the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Text 8. यत्रच्छायोपलब्धेन सन्तुष्टो मितमुनिः विविक्तसरणः सन्तो मैत्रः करुण आत्मवान्.
For his income, a devotee should be satisfied with what he earns without great difficulty. He should not eat more than what is necessary. He should live in a secluded place and always be thoughtful, peaceful, friendly, compassionate, and self realized.
Text 9. शानुबन्धे च देहेऽस्मिन् अकुर्वन् असद् आग्रहं ज्ञानेन दृष्टतत्त्वेन प्राकृते पुरुषस्य च.
One's seeing power should be increased through knowledge of spirit and matter, and one should not unnecessarily identify himself with the body and thus become attracted by bodily relationships.
Text 7. Text 10. Nivritta buddhi avasthano दूरीभूतान्यदर्शनः उपलब्ध्यात्मनात्मनां चक्षुषे वार्कम् आत्मदृक्.
One should be situated in the transcendental position, beyond the stages of material consciousness, and should be aloof from all other conceptions of life. Thus, realizing freedom from false ego, one should see his own self just as he sees the sun in the sky.
Text 11. मुक्तलिङ्गं सत् आभासम् असति प्रतिपद्यते सतो बन्धुम् असच्चक्षुः सर्वानुस्यतम् अद्वयम्.
A liberated soul realizes the absolute personality of Godhead, who is transcendental and who is manifest as a reflection, even in the false ego. He is the support of the material cause and he enters into everything. He is absolute, one without a second, and he is the eyes of the illusory energy.
Text 12. यथा जलस्थ आभासः स्थलस्थानेन्वन् दृश्यते स्वभासेन तथा सूर्यो जलस्थेन दिवि स्थितः.
The presence of the Supreme Lord can be realized just as the sun is realized first as a reflection on water and again as a second reflection on the wall of a room, although the sun itself is situated in the sky.
Text 13. इवं त्रिवृत् अहङ्कारो भूतेन्द्रिय मनोमयाहि स्वभासैर्लक्षितोनेन सत् अभासेन सत्यदृक्.
The self realized soul is thus reflected first in the threefold ego and then in the body, senses, and mind.
Text 14. भूता सूक्ष्मेन्द्रियामानो बुद्धियदिश्व इह निद्रया लीने स्व असति यस्तत्र विनिद्रो निरहङ्क्रियाः.
Although a devotee appears to be merged in the five material elements, the objects of material enjoyment, the material senses, and material mind and intelligence, he is understood to be awake and to be freed from the false ego.
Text 15. मन्यमानस्तदात्मनम् अनष्टो नष्टवान् मृषा नष्टे अहङ्कराणे दृष्टा नष्टवित्त इवातुरः.
The living entity can vividly feel his existence as the seer, but because of the disappearance of the ego during the state of deep sleep, he falsely takes himself to be lost, like a man who has lost his fortune and feels distressed, thinking himself to be lost.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Anusuya Mataji and Purta Prabhu, for the very nice recitation. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Purata Sundar Prabhu, Anusuya Mataji, thank you for your nice recitation.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you.
Welcome, dear devotees, to today's chat session. We continue with our reading and discussion of the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 27th chapter entitled Understanding Material Nature. And today we shall be discussing text number 6 and 7. Before we do so, we shall recite the Mangala Charanam prayers. So please feel free to join in behind muted mics. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutan Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastate Tapta Kanchana Gourange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivashadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastacha Deshatarine Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we're doing text number 6 today. So quickly the context. Lord Kapila Dev is instructing his mother Devahuti. He started off this chapter by the Lord describing the jiva in its conditioned state. And in these texts 6 to 11 in this section of the chapter, there is a section called Attaining Liberation by Yoga. So therefore we'll see a lot or some description of the yogic process here. Yogic process means the Ashtanga yogic process. So text number 6. Yamadhibir yoga patai abhyasan shrarayan vitaha mahi bhavena satyena matkatha shravanena cha. Word for word synonyms. Yama adibir, beginning with yama. Yoga patai, by the yoga system. Abhyasan, practicing. Shraddhaya, anvita, with great faith. Mahi, unto me. Bhavena, with devotion. Satyena, unalloyed. Matkata, stories about me. Shravanena, by hearing. Cha, and. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. One has to become faithful by practicing the yoga, by practicing the controlling process of the yoga system, and must elevate himself to the platform of unalloyed devotional service by chanting and hearing about me. Purport. Yoga is practiced in different stages: yam, niyam, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Yam and niyam means practicing the controlling process by following strict regulations. And asana refers to the sitting postures. These help raise one to the standard of faithfulness in devotional service. The practice of yoga by physical exercise is not the ultimate goal. The real end is to concentrate and to control the mind and train oneself to be situated in faithful devotional service. Bhavena or bhava is a very important factor in the practice of yoga or in any spiritual process. Bhava is explained in Bhagavad Gita 10.8. Buddha bhava samanvitaha. One should be absorbed in the thought of love of Krishna. When one knows that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the source of everything and that everything emanates from him, aham sarvasya prabhava, then one understands the Vedanta aphorism, janmadi asya yata, the original source of everything. And then he can become absorbed in bhava, or the preliminary stage of love of Godhead. Rupa Goswami explains very nicely in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu how this bhava, or preliminary stage of love of God, is achieved. He states that one first of all has to become faithful. Shraddha yanvitaha. Faith is attained by controlling the senses, either by yoga practice, following the rules and regulations, and practicing the sitting postures, or by engaging directly in bhakti yoga, as recommended in the previous verse. Of the 9 different items of bhakti yoga, the first and foremost is to chant and hear about the Lord. That is also mentioned here, mat katha shravanena cha. One may come to the standard of faithfulness, following the rules and regulations of the yoga system. The same goal can be achieved simply by chanting and hearing about the transcendental activities of the Lord. The word cha is significant. Bhakti yoga is direct, and the other process is indirect. But even if the indirect process is taken, there is no success unless one comes fully to the direct process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. Therefore, the word satyena is used here. In this connection, Swami Sridhar comments that satyena means nishkapatina, without duplicity. The impersonalists are full of duplicity. Sometimes they pretend to execute devotional service, but the ultimate idea is to become one with the Supreme. This is duplicity, kapata. The Bhagavatam does not allow this duplicity. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is clearly stated, Parama Nirmatsaranam. This treaty, Srimad Bhagavatam, is meant for those who are completely free from envy. The same point is again stressed here. Unless one is completely faithful to the personality of Godhead and engages himself in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, there is no possibility of liberation. So interesting verse, because this verse is talking about 2 processes, the process of Astanga Yoga and the process of unalloyed devotional service, Uttama Bhakti. And it also talks about the process of being faithful. So the first point Prabhupada makes is the connection between the yoga system and devotional service. The 8-fold yoga process Prabhupada describes, starting with yam and ending with samadhi. Samadhi means trance or complete absorption. And Prabhupada makes the point that one can raise oneself to the standard of faithfulness in devotional service by the Astanga Yoga process, or which is the indirect process, or through the direct process of devotional service, which Prabhupada says the 8 processes of bhakti, starting with Shravana, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting. And Prabhupada makes the point also that Ashtanga yoga has to include bhakti, for it to be successful. Just by itself, that process is weak. So one has to come to the stage of hearing and chanting. Prabhupada talks about bhava, the word bhavena, in the verse. And Prabhupada says, bhava means to be absorbed in thought of love of Krishna. When one knows Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is everything. So one has to come to the point of loving Krishna. Only then can one be absorbed. If there is no love, there is no absorption. Interestingly, Vaisheshika Prabhu was giving a class recently in Soho Street Temple. And in the class, he was talking about absorption. And he was saying that how Rupa Goswami explains different personalities who were absorbed in thought of Krishna. Firstly, the gopis were absorbed, thinking of how Krishna could be their lover. Kamsa was absorbed 24 hours a day thinking of Krishna, but in fear. Shishupal was absorbed from the very moment he was born in hatred of Krishna. That's all he could think about, hating Krishna. But that type of absorption is not bhavena. Srila Rupa Goswami explains what is Uttama Bhakti. Anya Bilashita Shunya Jnana Karmadi Anavrita Anukulyena Krishna Anushilanam Bhakti Uttama. That the nature of bhakti, it must be free from any desire for liberation, yogic processes, karma, any material gain. One should serve Krishna favorably as Krishna desires. So unless the mode is favorable, it's not devotional service. Although there may be some sort of absorption, and as in the case of Shishupal and Kamsa, they were killed by Krishna, and they attained a type of liberation, but that type of liberation is not very much welcomed by the devotees. This paragraph is very interesting. Prabhupada writes, Rupa Goswami explains very nicely in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, or preliminary stage of love of God, or this bhava. In Nectar of Devotion, Srila Rupa Goswami says that just like before the sun appears fully in the horizon, we see the sun rays come out. That's the first sign of the sun's appearance, is the sun rays. Although we're not seen the sun yet, we see the sun rays. So in the same way, the preliminary stage of love of Godhead, prema, is known as bhava. And bhava is compared to be the first rays of the sun of prema. So that's bhava bhakti. And Prabhupada says, quoting Rupa Goswami, he says that Rupa Goswami says that first one has to become faithful. Shraddha yanvitaha. And then he explains that faith is attained by controlling the senses, either by yoga practice, following the rules and regulations and practicing the sitting postures, or by directly engaging in bhakti yoga. Now, someone may ask the question, why? What is the link between controlling the senses and faith? Does that mean that simply by controlling the senses, one develops faith? That would mean any person who has control over the senses should develop faith. It's not necessarily that only by controlling the senses, but it's important. Therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami, very interestingly, he has given us this beautiful book called Nectar of Instructions, Sri Upadeshamrit. And he starts off the very first verse, Vacha Vegam, Manasokroda Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udarapasta Vegam. Etan Vegam yo Vishaheta Dira, Sarvam Apimam Pritivim Sashishyat. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. That's a very interesting verse. That's why Srila Rupa Goswami starts off with this verse, which is all about controlling the senses, the tongue, the belly, and the genitals. Because Srila Rupa Goswami is again telling us that faith begins by control of the senses. The ultimate goal, we start from Shraddha and we land up in Prema. The goal is to be completely absorbed in Krishna. If one's senses are uncontrolled, then where is the question of ever becoming absorbed? And Prabhupada says to become faithful. To become faithful, one has to control the senses. Faith means, Prabhupada gives the definition of faith. He says the faith means the complete conviction that simply by serving Krishna, I can attain all success in life. That's the meaning of faith. So, one who wants to attain Krishna, they will be prepared to forsake all of the pulling of the senses, the urges of the belly, the tongue, the genitals. Because one will think, I have a higher goal. I have a higher purpose. I want to attain Krishna. So to attain Krishna, I am prepared to forsake all of these pulling of the senses. And interesting, Prabhupada said, you can control the senses by the Eightfold Mystic Yoga process, or simply by hearing and chanting. I think we all have personal experience that when we first came to Krishna consciousness, we may have had, well, I can speak for myself, maybe not for you. We had different bad habits. And we realized to give up, to become Krishna conscious, we have to give up these bad habits. And ordinarily, it may seem that, oh, this is a really big ask. How to give up these bad habits? All my life, I've been accustomed to it. I'm so attracted to it. How can I stop it? But the moment we start chanting Hare Krishna, the moment we hear Krishna Katha, how miraculously it has been that we've been able to just give up these bad habits. This is the special potency of Bhakti Yoga, where others who do not take to the direct process, who take to the indirect process, they have, yam, niyam, the do's and don'ts, asana, yoga postures, pranayam, the breathing, pratyahara, withdrawing the senses, dharana, becoming steady. That depends a lot on our own effort. Prabhupada calls it the monkey process. Baby monkey has to hold on. So a lot of our own effort. Whereas Bhakti Yoga, the direct process, we depend on the mercy of Krishna. By engaging in Krishna's devotional service, starting off with Shravanam Kirtanam, one is able to control the senses, and thus faith develops very nicely for the practitioner of Bhakti Yoga. Very nicely. Then Prabhupada moves on to the purport and quoting Sridhar Swami, Prabhupada says, even if the indirect process is taken, there is no success unless one comes fully to the direct process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. Therefore, the word Satyena is used here. In this connection, Sridhar Swami comments. So Sridhar Swami is accepted by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the foremost commentator of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami. So Sridhar Swami gives a very interesting understanding of the word Satyena. He said Satyena means without duplicity. And Prabhupada says the impersonalists are full of duplicity. How? An impersonalist, and you see this quite often in the different Hindu groups, they'll come, they'll sing and they'll dance, they will offer arati, they will offer items to Krishna, they will recite Srimad Bhagavatam, they may even show tears while hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. And in one sense, externally, they can almost appear to be performing the same activities of bhakti. But there's a huge difference between a real devotee and an impersonalist. An impersonalist, while performing these different activities, his thought is focused on liberation. I am doing these things because I want liberation. And liberation for them means merging into the impersonal Brahman, becoming one with God. And Prabhupada quotes this verse, the second verse of the Bhagavatam, Paramo Nirmat Saranam, that this Bhagavatam is for those who are free of envy, those who are free of the cheating propensity. To cheat means to portray an external appearance as such, but having a different motive. So when a devotee serves Krishna, the devotee's only motive is, may Krishna be pleased with the service. A devotee is never thinking, may I attain liberation at the end of my life by performing this service. No, devotee has no such thought. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you can handle me roughly. You can even make me broken-hearted by not being in front of me. But still, I am your unallowed devotee eternally. So, one should practice devotional service without duplicity, without any desire for jnana, karma, yoga, adi. One has to be free of all of it. Only Savai Pumsa Paro Dharmo Yato Bhakti Adakshaje Ahaituki Apratiyata Yayatma Suprasidati. Yayatma Suprasidati, in order to completely satisfy the self, one should perform devotional service, which is Ahaituki Apratihata, unmotivated and uninterrupted. Only then can the self be satisfied. So beautiful purport, beautiful verse. Any reflections on this verse and purport before we move on to the next verse for today? Any comments, realizations, reflections anyone has? Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
You made a reference to the gopis, and my reflection is the Bhava Bhakti of the gopis is probably the topmost, because they forgot all social norms and conventions in their obligations, their families, in their devotion to Krishna. And one thing that stands out for me is that they thought, we don't want to even blink because we're going to miss saying Krishna. So even that split second was important for them, like not to miss saying Krishna. So in terms of Bhava Bhakti, when you mentioned the gopis, that kind of, I remember that reading that. So that's my reflection, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Nice reflection. As Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, that the gopis are the highest example of unalloyed devotional service. Although externally, it may seem that they wanted Krishna for their own gratification, it was not true. They wanted to be with Krishna and to please Krishna for Krishna's gratification. Nice reflection, Mataji. Okay. We'll move on to the next verse. So the next verses 7 to 10 are a description of the 18 qualities to be cultivated by the Jnani. So these verses 7 to 10. So verse 7, which we'll describe now, is some of those 18 qualities. Sarva bhuta samatvena nirvairena prasangataha brahmacharyena monena swadharmena bali yasa. Synonyms: sarva, all, bhuta, living entities, samatvena, by seeing equally, nivairena, without enmity, aprasangataha, without intimate connections, brahmacharyena, by celibacy, monena, by silence, sarvadharmena, by one's occupation, bali yasa, by offering this result. Translation: in executing devotional service, one has to see every living entity equally, without enmity towards anyone, yet without intimate connections with anyone. One has to observe celibacy, be grave, and execute his eternal activities, offering the results to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport: a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead who seriously engages in devotional service is equal to all living entities. There are various species of living entities, but a devotee does not see the outward covering. He sees the inner soul inhabiting the body, because each and every soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He does not see any difference. That is the vision of a learned devotee. As explained in Bhagavad Gita, a devotee or a learned sage does not see any difference between a learned brahmana, a dog, an elephant, or a cow. because he knows that the body is the outer covering only, and the soul is actually part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Anyone knows which verse this is referring to? Anyone knows the Sanskrit? Yes. Brahma Kavi Astina Suni Cheva Swapakache Pandita Sarva Darshinaha Sarma Darshinaha. A devotee has no enmity towards any living entity, but that does not mean that he mixes with everyone. That is prohibited. Aprasangataha means not to be in intimate touch with everyone. A devotee is concerned with his execution of devotional service, and he should therefore mix with devotees only in order to advance his objective. He has no business mixing with others. Although he does not see anyone as his enemy, his dealings are only with persons who engage in devotional service. A devotee should observe the vow of celibacy. Celibacy does not necessitate that one be absolutely free from sex life. Satisfaction with one's wife is permitted, also under the vow of celibacy. The best policy is to avoid sex life altogether. That is preferable. Otherwise, a devotee can get married under religious principles and live peacefully with a wife. A devotee should not speak needlessly. A serious devotee has no time to speak of nonsense. He's always busy in his Krishna always busy in Krishna consciousness. Whenever he speaks about Krishna. Mauna means silence. Silence does not mean that one should not speak at all, that he should not speak of nonsense. He should be very enthusiastic in speaking about Krishna. Another important item described here is swadharmena, or being exclusively occupied in one's eternal occupation, which is to act as the eternal servant of the Lord, or to act in Krishna consciousness. The word Bali Yasya means offering the results of one's activities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A devotee does not act on his personal account for sense gratification. Whatever he earns, whatever he eats, and whatever he does, he offers for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these are qualities equal to all living entities, no enmity, no intimate connections, celibacy, being grave, offering the results of one's activities to the Lord. These are nice qualities for us to keep in our heart, in our mind, and to always gauge how we are practicing. And very importantly, be equal to all living entities. This is a very important quality of a devotee. And Prabhupada says that a devotee sees all living entities equally because he sees the soul in all living entities and the Lord accompanying the soul as Paramatma. But although the devotee sees everyone equally, he makes distinction with who to intimately associate with. Those who are not devotees, we do not associate with intimately, and we only associate with devotees intimately. We see everyone equally, but we apply discrimination in terms of how we associate. And again, very similar, Srila Rupa Goswami explains this in the Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada talks about celibacy. Actually, in all other processes besides bhakti, the process of jnana, karma, astanga, yoga, everything requires complete celibacy. Only in the process of bhakti is one allowed to marry, engage in sex life, and have children. And why is that so? Because even in the process of engaging in sex life, the devotee sees that as service to Krishna. Let me bring Krishna conscious children into the world. Let me raise my children as devotees. Let them serve the mission of the Lord. Let them serve the Lord. So therefore, bhakti is so powerful that even celibacy Even a married person is considered to be celibate in bhakti. And Prabhupada clarifies the last one about Mona, not speaking. Prabhupada says not speaking means not speaking nonsense. But one can speak 24 hours a day about Krishna. Real speaking means speaking about Krishna. Real silence means not talking nonsense. And lastly, Prabhupada says a devotee offers the results of all his activities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whatever he earns, whatever he eats, and whatever he does, he offers for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's 8:08 now. I'm conscious that some of you will have to leave for other services, so I'll stop here. If anyone has got any questions, comments, reflections, even corrections, please feel free to express yourself by unmuting. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for this wonderful class.
Thank you, Jyoti Mataji.
Krishna.
Okay. If there's no questions or comments or reflections, shall we close today's session?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you. Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha, kripasindhiveva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnava ki
Jai.
Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Amki
Jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna.
Prabhuji, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.